every one of you risked death to be here today. You could have stayed home, maybe watched a bit of television, but no. Instead, you got in your car to come here knowing you could have died in a car accident. Now let's say that going to this summit exposed you to an additional 1 in a million chance of dying. If you expect to live another 50 years, then your average loss from this extra risk of death, it isn't much. It's just 26 minutes of life, and hopefully this conference will prove worth that small price. But what if you're a singularity believer, and you think that if I can survive a few more decades, I've got a good chance of living forever in utopia? Well, now that 1 in a million chance of death you risked to hear me talk, and obviously far more important people talk, that was a really high price to pay. It's hard for me to understand how a rational singularitist would come to this conference. Thank you. When people come to expect the singularity, their behavior is going to radically change. And you can profit from understanding this. Now, it's very difficult to make investments that you think are probably going to pay off post-singularity. Because first, we really have no idea what the world's going to be like after the singularity, and money might not even have value after the singularity, and the singularity is, from 30 to 100 years away. But I suspect that long before there is a singularity, most people will come to expect the singularity. And as an economist, I know that people's expectations today affect their behavior today. I think it's very likely that within 20 years, most people will expect the singularity. For example, let's say that within 20 years, scientists create a computer simulation of a chimpanzee's brain, and they put this simulation in a robot's body, and this simulation acts just as a real chimp does. Well, then a lot of people are going to think, gee, if we can create a computer chimp, we can create a computer man. And once we have a computer man, of course, eventually, because of Moore's law, we'll be able to speed up the simulation a millionfold, create 1 million copies of this computer man, and get a singularity. Or perhaps within 20 years, people will think, eventually a computer is going to pass the Turing test. And of course, once a computer does pass the Turing test, we speed up the computer 1 millionfold, make 1 million copies, and we get a singularity. Or perhaps within 20 years, brain-computer interfaces will be increasing at such a rate that an intelligence explosion seems inevitable. Or maybe within 20 years, advances in gene therapy and eugenics will mean that there have been 1 million babies born, each of whom are going to be smarter than Einstein. An understanding of what these super kids are eventually going to achieve will convince most people that, yeah, a singularity is inevitable. I think if any of these 4 situations that I've outlined occur, at the very least, technological opinion leaders will come to believe in the singularity. And once they do, I have a feeling this information is going to disseminate to the masses. I think it's wrong to say the reason we all believe in the singularity is because we're so much smarter than everyone else. I think once the signs of the singularity appear, most people will start to believe in the singularity, and that is really going to radically change our world. A singularity believer's top priority in life should be to make it to the singularity. This has really significant implications for how they're going to want their government to behave. Precursor singularity technologies are almost certainly going to destabilize existing balance of power relationships. You combine this with singularity believers' utter terror of death, and believers are going to want their governments to spend huge sums on national defense. And of course, once some countries spend a lot on national defense, others are going to want to as well, to protect themselves. So I think once people become singularity believers, there's going to be this huge upward spiral of defense spending. Now, this is going to sound Machiavellian, but you can profit from predicting this. Making the right investments today can allow you to make a lot of money once people start to expect the singularity. Now, singularity believers are going to be willing to spend a lot of their own money to increase the chance of making it to the singularity. They will, for example, spend a lot for just slightly safer cars in order to avoid being in a fatal accident. So if you have a technology that can just slightly increase the safety of cars, say computer-controlled cars or better airbags or whatever, that's going to be worth a huge, huge amount once a lot of people become singularity believers. Today, construction workers receive higher wages than they otherwise would because of the dangers of their jobs. Basically, markets have to pay construction workers more than they pay people who work in similar jobs that aren't as dangerous, or else no one would be a construction worker. But what happens when construction workers become singularity believers? Well, they're not going to risk death, or if they do, they'll only do it for extraordinarily high wages. You can profit from knowing this. Because if you've got technologies that reduce the danger of dying on a job, or you've got technologies that can be used to replace people with machines in dangerous jobs, you're going to make a lot of money. I also think singularity believers are going to be especially willing to sign up for cryonics. Let me ask here, how many of you have signed up for cryonics? Raise your hands. Okay, that's a huge number. Only about 1,300 people in the entire world have signed up for cryonics. Not very many. A vastly disproportionate number are in this room. Singularity believers really should be far more likely to sign up for cryonics than ordinary mortals. Right, under cryonics, your body is frozen, and then it's stored until we have the technology to, I guess, reanimate you. But if you think, a lot of people think, well, gee, we won't have that technology for 1,000 years. And there's no way that your body's going to remain intact for the next 1,000 years. But of course, if you're a singularity believer, you almost got to think that if it's 50 or so years, you'll almost certainly think after the singularity we'll have the technology. So if you're a singularity believer, you think, gee, my body will just have to stay frozen for 50 years or so. And that's quite plausible. And some of you, I'm sure, are venture capitalists. Think about investing in for-profit cryonic services. This could pay off big once people start to expect the singularity. Expecting the singularity will not only cause people to be extremely fearful of death, but will also, I think, cause them to invest less in non-entertaining education. I teach at Smith College, a really, really expensive private school. My students, I think, figure, well, okay, we're paying a lot to go to Smith, but we're going to have higher lifetime incomes because of this, so we'll recoup the cost of our Smith education over our 30 or 40-year career. But I think once people become singularity believers, they're going to start to suspect that what they're learning in college will quickly be useless. For example, let's say you don't like learning languages, but you figure, Chinese is going to be really important. So I'm going to suffer, I'm going to spend hundreds, maybe 1,000 hours learning Chinese. I'm going to pay for a really good tutor. That's a bad idea if you think within 10 years we're going to have universal translators. Or maybe you're thinking of being a surgeon. You're going to study boring topics like organic chemistry in college. You're then going to suffer through 4 years in medical school and, 4, 10, whatever years as a resident to become a surgeon. But why would you do that if you think in 15 years computers will be vastly better at humans at operating? Or maybe you want to be a civil engineer, study civil engineering in college. Why would you do this if you think within 20 years we'll be able to use nanotech to instantly create buildings? There'll still be a value for education that's fun. People will learn Shakespeare because they like it. But I don't think people are going to be, suffering to learn stuff that they don't enjoy. And sadly, most college students don't enjoy most of their classes. This means, I think, investments in for-profit educational institutions, I think they're going to be losers once people start to expect the singularity. Expectors in the singularity, I think, are going to save a lot less for retirement. And to show why, imagine that for some reason a magical oracle appeared here. And we all trusted the oracle, and the oracle said, I know for certain one of these three outcomes is going to happen. Either everyone's going to die, or everyone's going to win more than $1 billion, or civilization will change so much that money no longer has a value. If you knew one of these three things would definitely happen relatively soon, rationally, you'd stop saving, because money obviously has no value under the first and last, and if you have over $1 billion, saving an extra few $1,000s, this year isn't going to mean much to you. So singularity believers are going to save less. Imagine you're a 30-year-old and you've been saving for your retirement that you think is going to start around 2045. You come to this conference like, oh my God, these people are right. There's going to be a singularity by 2045. Well, you shouldn't save any more for your retirement. Another reason we save for our retirement is we figure as we get old, our bodies start to fall apart, we can't earn any money. So we got to save now while we're healthy and can work for our frail old age. But I bet the singularity believers in this audience think, if they're alive in 2045, their bodies are going to be a lot better than their bodies today. So it's another reason singularity believers shouldn't worry about saving for their old age. Okay, now what happens when lots and lots of people stop saving for their retirement? Well, for reasons I don't really want to go into, when lots of people save less, interest rates go up. Actually, real interest rates, but I don't think we'll have a problem with deflation or inflation. So just think about interest rates going up. There's lots and lots of ways you can profit from knowing that interest rates are going to go up. For example, with high interest rates, you don't want to buy bonds. With high interest rates, you don't want to buy bonds. In fact, you want to short them. With high interest rates, you should prefer a fixed interest rate home mortgage rather than a variable rate home mortgage. This is one of the most practical things you'll probably hear at this conference. You're going to get a 30-year home mortgage. You're better off with a fixed interest rate mortgage than a variable rate mortgage if you think people will start to expect the singularity within the next 30 years. Most importantly, however, with high interest rates, businesses and people care more about the present than the future. So companies that have long-term investment horizons, they're not going to do very well. For example, if you think the singularity is near, you think there'll be a singularity in 10 or 15 years, you're not going to want to invest in a pharmaceutical company that's developing drugs now that won't be ready for 20 years. That investment would be a loser. The stocks of those companies are going to go way down once people start to expect the singularity. You're also not going to want to invest in new office buildings. If you're a property developer, you'll spend a lot of money to build a building, and you'll expect to recoup your costs over the next 50 years in rents. But if you think, this office building won't have much value after the singularity, because again, nanotech will instantly create it, or we'll all live in virtual worlds or whatever, well, then you're not going to want to invest in this property developer. And if their stocks, if they're companies of property developers, the stocks values of those are going to go way down once people start to expect the singularity. Let me summarize this talk. I've speculated that long before there is a singularity, people are going to expect the singularity. And I've said I think that's going to change behavior in 3 ways. First, people will be very fearful of death. Second, they'll invest less in non-entertaining education. And third, they're going to save less, causing higher interest rates. I've also tried to explain or guess at some ways you can profit from knowing this. Now, there are probably many, many other ways you can benefit from predicting and understanding singularity expectations. To figure out these ways, ask yourself the following 3 questions. 1, how should I change my behavior because of my expectations about the singularity? 2, how will others change their behavior when they come to expect the singularity? And 3, how can I profit from successfully predicting 2? Financial markets offer their greatest rewards to those who act on information that the broad market hasn't yet taken into account. Well, if the premise of this summit is correct, you all have inside information into the most radical change that will ever befall humanity. Profit from this information. Thank you. So, if we have time, I'm willing to take questions. Okay. Yes.
Do you have an idea of the limit on how high interest rates could go under your
It depends on how many people believe in the singularity, and I imagine if things got really bad, the government might force people to start saving. So it's hard to know. But it could be bad, and it could really slow down our economy. I mean, once people think there'll be a singularity, they'll stop worrying about the future, and of course, when everyone worries about the future, we reduce economic activity. Now, the singularity technologies might more than make up for it, but I think singularity expectations could be a drag on our economy. Oh, sorry, yes. Yes.
How would belief in the singularity differ from belief in the end time in Christianity?
No, that's a good question. So how would belief in the singularity differ from belief in the end time of Christianity? I think there's a lot of similarities. I mean, if you're a Christian and believe in heaven and hell, that really should affect your behavior, right? If you're a Christian and committing adultery, I would say you're either very irrational or you don't really believe what you're saying. If you're a singularist and you drive to the movie or to a conference, well, I don't understand why you're doing that. I think one big way it would differ, you're probably wondering why I would be here. Well, by speaking in front of you, I gain social status, and there's a correlation between social status and life expectancy. So I win. I don't know what your excuse is, but I'm increasing my lifespan by being here. But to answer your question about belief in God, I mean, God is presumably judging you. So if there's these weird loopholes where doing something would cause society to collapse, you could say, well, God won't let me do that. Like if everyone stops working, God wouldn't like that, meaning you're more likely to go to hell. There's probably not going to be people after the singularity saying, okay, you were good before the singularity, you're bad, you die, you live. So it'd be nice if there were, but there probably isn't. Yes?
So you described economic terms in terms of mass consumer retail. How does this affect verticals along the food chain?
I'm sorry, how does this affect?
Let's look at verticals. Vertical industries are usually very differently constructed than horizontal-based consumer industries. And I can see a completely different economic trend, in fact, contrarian economic investment strategy.
Okay, so you're saying there's a difference between vertical industries that are vertically organized and horizontally organized. Actually, I don't think economists would agree with that, so it's hard for me to answer your question since I don't agree with the premise. I'm sorry. No, I think profit maximization causes firms to act basically the same, whether there's a vertical monopoly or a vertical oligopoly. But yes.
How do you think belief in the singularity will affect protection of the environment? Because in one sense, you could view that we might as well just worry about the economy now and let technology fix the mess in the future.
I think the question is, how will belief in the singularity cause people influence their cares about the environment? It depends on what kind of environmental issues. If it's stuff that can kill you soon, yeah, you'll be terrified of it. You'll be very scared of dying of malaria or West Nile virus. But if it's stuff that's far in the future, you're going to say, so what? I mean, we've designed Yucatan Mountain in Nevada is a place we've designed to put atomic waste in, and they've designed it to be safe for the next, 10,000 or 100,000 years? You're a singularity believer. You're not going to care about whether there's a leak in radioactive waste from Yucatan Mountain in 10,000 years because the godlike intelligences will probably be able to handle it. Same with global warming. Now, if global warming could cause our planet to turn into Mercury in the next decade, yeah, that's a real problem. But if it's, going to be okay for the next century, then it could get bad, well, so what if you're a singularity believer?
Thank you. I think we've had all the questions we can take for now.